Well, I'd like to thank ICBC for inviting me back. Being an economist, I didn't bore the crowd too much last year. So, I have 2 daughters, and one of the daughters refers to economics as not just economics, but boring economics. And so, hopefully today I won't inundate you with too many data points. And so my other daughter is going to college next year, and I asked her if she was going to study economics. She said, hell no. But my name's Beau Whitney. I'm the chief economist at Whitney Economics. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, on the west coast of the United States. Today I'm going to try to provide an overview of the world, the US, Europe, and then dig into some Spain data. And so, like I said, we're a global leader in cannabis and hemp research, and we provide data to governments, to operators, to investors, and the like. And so, I'm going to talk specifically about Spain as well. There's some really interesting data out of Spain these days. But just as an overview, and I know that it's a friendly audience, but cannabis is really 3 industries in one. There's the adult use, there's medical, and then there's industrial. And industrial is also known as hemp. And then within hemp, there's the cannabinoid. There's 3 industries in one with hemp. Industrial are the cannabinoids and fibers and grain. And so there's lots of economic opportunity in either of these sectors. And so it's just important to choose one and run with it. A lot of countries are viewing cannabis reform favorably as a tool for economic development. It's different for one country versus another, but they're looking at this for job creation, for tax revenue, for reductions in healthcare spending because of the health benefits of cannabis as a proactive medicine and the like. So lots of interest right now in cannabis reform. In fact, and Giada touched upon this earlier today, there's over 115 countries that have legalized access to cannabis in some form or another, from adult use, from medical, or even CBD. And so various reform, entails different opportunities. And when you combine hemp and adult use and medical together, it's a $1 trillion market. With 500 million consumers. So lots of opportunity out there. Now, putting together total potential market data, a lot of the analysts usually look at the UN ODC numbers, the United Nations data that looks at usage rates. And they do these interviews in country by country. Sometimes there's 5 years that separate the surveys, in the Congo from, 2005 and then 2010 and maybe 2020. So it's kind of fits and starts. And so I use the UN data as a baseline. I consider that the low end because it's very conservative. And then I build my models based upon other countries and then, so I've developed a midpoint and an upper bound. So what I've got here on the right-hand side, on this side, is how things break down from that legal perspective. So although there's legal revenue, there's potential revenue. And so in the medical countries where there's legal access, those markets are huge and they're the largest opportunity. So if you get in there and then things go adult use, then there's huge upside potential in that market. And so medical is by far the largest opportunity, even outpacing illicit. And so I found that to be kind of interesting when I was running this data. But you've got about a $500 million market in the midpoint, and so huge global potential. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the U.S. market. It's in a bit of a state of disarray right now. There's a lot of murkiness about what the policy should be, the federal legalization. There's banking issues, there's taxation issues, there's social equity issues, there's interstate commerce, prohibitions. And so you really have to look at the US in discrete markets, state by state by state. And so it's super fragmented. And the regulators at the state level and at the federal level are really having difficulty managing the differences between hemp and the policies related to hemp, and managing the difference between hemp and adult use and medical. And so they first separated them, and then now they're trying to put them back together because they are looking at hemp as cannabinoids and intoxicating rather than hemp in those three distinct markets that I mentioned earlier. So, but as a result of all of this murkiness, this toggle between hemp and adult use, it's actually disincentivizing consumers to participate in the legal markets. In fact, 11 states last year saw declines in sales rather than increases in sales. And so there was, the level of growth was much less than it has been before COVID and when the reform really started taking place during the green rush. And a business condition survey that I published, a report that I published about a year ago, said that 24% of cannabis operators in the United States were profitable, 24%. So that means 76% were either breaking even or not. And so it talks about the health of the US cannabis market. And then I'm on the cusp of publishing a report on delinquent payments. And basically in the United States, operators aren't paying other operators. And so there's an incentive because of the high cost of capital, there's an incentive just not to pay each other because you can finance that debt for free rather than going to a bank, if you can get one, and paying 35 to 40% interest rates. So the way that the system in the United States works is that it incentivizes businesses not to pay each other. And so this has never been published before, but the amount of delinquent receivables in the United States at the end of 2023 was $3.8 billion. Now that's almost 2 months of revenue in the entire legal market in the United States. It's 1.6 months. So this is a huge existential threat that very few people are talking about. And so if you don't pay each other, then it's tough to pay your own bills. It's tough to pay your own debt service. It's tough to pay your taxes. And so I'm going to publish a report next week on this with more details, but that's kind of late-breaking news. So it's a policy issue that needs to be addressed, and the policymakers right now are so focused on intoxicating hemp that they're not taking care of their own markets from an adult use and medical regulatory perspective. Now, this is a lesson to be learned for Europe because it's important that if you regulate a market, you should try to not only regulate it and continue to stay on it, but also consider the health of the operators that you're trying to regulate. And right now, there's a health issue associated with operators in adult use and medical in the United States. Now, we put together a forecast. This is a refreshed forecast from last year. We actually took down the 2024 forecast by $3 billion. And the reason that we took it down, it's still showing growth, 9% growth, but just not the type of growth that you would expect post-COVID. And the reason we took it down is that higher interest rates, there's inflation, and there's just not enough money being loaned out there in order to get businesses opened up and ramping. And so those ramps are kind of muted. And so we're forecasting that this growth rate will be lower than normal in 2024 and 2025, and it'll start accelerating in the back half of 2025. So still pretty decent growth. Any industry would want 10% growth or 9% growth, but in cannabis in the United States is a bit of a disappointment. And a lot of the growth is going to come not from the mature markets like Colorado or Oregon or Washington, but will come from new markets that have just deployed their program and it's starting to ramp. So I just published the global forecast as well. And the European market is like the second largest market on the globe from a potential revenue perspective. It's fourth or fifth from a consumer perspective. But the total addressable market's about 53 billion on the low end. Giada earlier today published 68 million or 68 billion. That was more in the middle of my forecast. And then there's an upper bound as well, which could be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It just depends upon which countries you consider. And so I take some of the statistics from the World Bank, and so they consider Russia as part of the EU, or the part of Europe. And so they tend to bring up the numbers a little bit. Now, Germany is in focus right now because of what's going on next week. But if they continue to waffle back and forth on their policy, there's a good chance that Spain and other countries could start influencing the European reform movement more so than Germany. And so it just depends upon the timing. But when these large countries like the United States or Germany tend to waffle, then it opens up opportunities for other countries to take the lead. And so there's very little data about the European markets, but it's getting better. And we're here to help. So if you need any data or insights, I'll have my contact information at the back half of this presentation. So 5 countries make up a majority of the demand. That's 53 billion. Now that's on the low end. And so Spain, you see in there, is right around $5 billion. I'm sorry I didn't put this in euros. When I speak in Berlin, I'll put these in euros. But $5 billion is a pretty decent market. Now, for perspective, that's maybe the size of some states in the United States, like New York. But still a pretty decent market. Now, that's total market. That's illicit plus legal, or whatever you really call legal here in Spain. Now, based upon the UN numbers, there's 3.3 million consumers of cannabis in Spain. And it's reform is very popular. And so the citizens want reform, at least for medical, 84% based upon recent surveys. But there could be as many as 7 or 8 million consumers in this space. Now, right now, that's not being serviced by the legal market, obviously. And so all of this is illicit. And so the supply is coming in both domestically and from Africa and from the rest of Europe. And so what I have here is also the amount of total consumption from an output perspective, so total amount of pounds of output that you would need to satisfy all this demand. And so it's 824,000 kilos. And so that's 824 tons. Now, for perspective, this last year there was roughly 24 tons produced and maybe 36 tons this year. So only 4% of the total demand is being produced from a supply perspective. Now, when you talk about cannabis, a lot of people talk about the demand, but they don't talk about supply. But supply is super important. If you don't have enough, prices stay up and consumers remain on the illicit market. If you have too much, then prices collapse, which is great for consumer and participation, but it's not good for the operators because it compresses their margins. So striking a balance of supply versus demand is super important in any market that you go into. Now, Canada started this, the US followed suit, Europe may be right behind them, but nobody seems to have learned from the mistakes of other countries. And so Canada, they oversupplied, prices crashed. They actually ended up destroying a lot of cannabis. They were hoping to ship it to Europe, and it didn't quite work out very well. They were hoping to ship it to the United States, but they didn't legalize. But then the United States, they are overproducing right now. In fact, there's more capacity legally authorized in the United States than all of the consumers, illicit and legal, in the United States. There's already more capacity. So this is, has the potential of crashing prices, oversupplying markets, and then really hurting potential opportunities for other people who want to enter into other states. Now, I talked about industrial hemp, and so I just wanted to comment that even with just a few sectors, automobile, construction, plastics, with a skosh of cannabinoids in there, the hemp market is actually bigger than the adult use and medical market globally. And so when people talk about cannabis, there's a lot of influence that could be made by the hemp industry, and hemp may be the driver of cannabis reform more so than a medical to adult use conversion. But just wanted to talk about this. Now, in some countries, they view it all as cannabis, and then in other countries, like in the United States, they try to differentiate based upon THC content. But regardless of, and this differentiation can create conflicts between the hemp industry and the marijuana industry, especially when it comes to intoxicating cannabinoids. And, so that conflict, I think, is unfortunate, and I think hemp and marijuana can coexist, and they should, because it's all basically the same plant. Now, just like, and one of the panelists, I think it was Jamie Pearson, mentioned that the EU is similar to the US in the fact that EU rules override countries, and then countries override their states or provinces or what have you. The same thing applies in the United States from a federal to state to county to city perspective. But a lot of the countries in the EU are defaulting to the EU policy, and they're not challenging it. Now, there is a rule that says if it's legal in one country and it's not for medical purposes, then it's legal to be sold in all countries in the EU. And so that's an interesting concept that is worth exploring, because it's like, I think there's somebody from Portugal here, right? So you produce in Portugal and then you can ship into Germany or ship into other markets. Okay, so it's the concept that right, okay, so there's nuances to it, but the concept is the same. It's the principle of shipping into a unified market versus carving that market out with individual rules and regulations. So if as an investor or as an operator you get set up in one country, then there's opportunities because of the size of these markets. There's opportunities later on if you're able to establish a good brand, a good quality product, and you can conform within the EU specifications. And so a lot of people are looking to the EU here in these European countries. The EU is looking to the US. The US isn't really doing anything. And so it's kind of like which domino will fall first before there's a rapid acceleration of reform. And that's tough to predict. I'm not going to opine on that. But if some of these larger countries, like I said, don't make some clarity on their policies, then they may be supplanted as world leaders. So, and I wanted to blast through this presentation so that I could take some questions later on, because I'm sure there's lots of questions on the data, or at least I hope there are. But if you're too shy to make any questions, then feel free to reach out with my contact information, and I'd be more than happy to share this presentation and some of the data with it. But in terms of prediction, Germany is on the cusp of being the first, and then I'm anticipating a rapid expansion of reform. These pilot programs and social clubs, it's a novel idea, and it's worth pursuing. And look for a regulation around certified seeds, because you have to start with stable genetics, and right now in the United States you don't have that, but in Europe it's pretty established. It's a very established market, the certified seed program. And public safety will remain foremost in the eyes of the policymakers, and so as business operators, it's important to consider public safety and build that in. And hemp will be a major market, not only in the US, but in Europe as well. So recommendations, communicate, educate, know everything about your business and your cost structure, because when I talk about oversupply, what that does is it compresses margins. Right now there's inflation, so when you have falling prices and increasing costs, that really squeezes the profits out of your business. And so if you don't know your cost structure, then you don't know when to make critical decisions about your business. So understanding cost structure is really, really important. And then also staying focused on your core competency. You can't be, everything to everybody. It's not possible, and it hasn't proven to be successful in the United States. For example, vertical integration was was in vogue for a long time, but in my delinquency report, I'm finding that even if you're vertically integrated and control all the costs within your vertical, they're still one of the largest contributors to delinquencies in the entire space. So there's still delinquent payment issues even in vertical integrated companies. So it's important to carve off what you know and what you're good at, and then pursue that with vigor and passion. And so another thing is that although we're in Spain and a lot of the focus is on Spain at your business, when we're in Germany, focus isn't on Germany. And so cannabis is a very local issue, but really remember that this is a global market. And so it's important to act local, but keep the global market in mind, because it will have an eventual influence on your business and on your success. So with that, feel free to reach out. Lots of data, lots to digest, and so just let me know. And so I'm happy to take questions. Thank you again.
Beau Whitney. Does anyone have a question? All the way over there. Let's hear it for Michael Knote.
I run.
Doing all the walking and running. He's very quick. It's very fast for a man in his 50s.
Hello. Thank you very much. That was fast. Thank you for this. I'm Tyler Secor. I'm with Reassure. We're based out of Michigan in the U.S. Just my question in general is this data, especially the delinquent payments, is this among more cannabis to cannabis, say, growers to producers, or did you factor in the safety compliance testing aspect of this as well?
So my delinquent report that's coming out next week on my website, it's a free report. It looked at not only all of the sectors and subsectors within cannabis, laboratory testing included, but it also looked at ancillary businesses. And so I was presenting at a group of CPAs, certified public accountants. Now, who's more boring, economists or accountants? I kind of vote accountants. But in that, the accountants, the CPAs, were saying that they're not getting paid. And so so these ancillary businesses, lawyers aren't getting paid. And so the question becomes an ethical dilemma for them. Do we not pay or do their taxes this season because they haven't paid us for last season? Or do we go ahead and just, put more revenue at risk? And so they're needs to be some discipline in here, but it looked at all sectors. Retail had it the easiest because they are closest to the consumer, and so they tended to be the ones that didn't pay through the product manufacturers and the cultivators. Cultivators on a percentage basis took it the hardest, meaning that they had the toughest time getting payment from others. And then the vertical integrated companies were also big contributors, and multi-state operators, unfortunately, the average per MSO was like $32 million in delinquent payments. So it's, everybody's contributing, and so there could be some regulatory intervention that's required to mandate payment adherence or cash on delivery or what have you. So a bit of an extended answer to your question, but Michigan is a tough market because there's lots of operators, falling prices. You've got huge legal participation because the consumers like the lower prices, but it's tough to be profitable in that type of environment. And then when you're not getting paid on top of that, 10 months of cash flow for a 12-month business, that's not a recipe for success. So thanks for the question.
I'm running.
Thank you for your discussion. It's very, very interesting. I'm Victor Jerez, Independent Advisors Principal. I found your comment about how in the United States, through the Farm Bill, they defined hemp versus cannabis or marijuana as a pivotal move, but now it's a problematic move, obviously, with THC 8, 9, and all of that. One question I have for you is that in 17, 18, CBD was present in so many consumer products in the United States. And with the definition of hemp as distinct, and it going from DEA to FDA, it's run into a thicket. I'm just wondering if you could share with the audience some of the learnings of that experience, and if there's any applicability to the market development here in Europe. Thank you.
So when it comes to the evolution of the hemp industry, early on in between 2014 and 2018, there was very few farms that grew hemp, and when they did, they grew it for fiber and for grain. And as a result, there wasn't a lot of cannabinoid plants and raw materials available. And so the cost of CBD isolate, for example, could easily run $40,000 a kilo. Then people seeking riches, seeing those high prices, they entered into the market due to one of the agricultural reform bills called the Farm Bill. And so at one point, 525,000 acres were licensed. 82% of that was for cannabinoid production. There was no infrastructure. There was very little processing, little drying, and little awareness on how to grow this stuff. And so there was a surplus of cannabinoid raw materials in the market that drove prices down. The very next year, people didn't learn from their mistakes. Other states entered into it and doubled the amount of excess inventory. So you had this 201 million pounds of excess cannabinoid raw material, 2 million kilos of CBD isolate just sitting on the shelves. So somebody had to figure out how to monetize that. And so that brought in some emerging innovation in the Delta 8, Delta 10 HHC markets. And so they were able to develop products that were intoxicating that had market demand, and they were able to consume a lot of that raw material. Well, now that a lot of that raw material inventory has been consumed, a lot of the farmers have gotten out of the industry. So instead of having 525,000 acres, you're back to pre-Farm Bill at 30,000 acres, and a majority of that now is fiber and grain. So there's a common theme here where you have this huge spike on cannabinoids, and then now it's going back to its roots in the fiber and grain sector. So, but policymakers have been trying to address the influx of cannabinoids into and competing with the medical and adult use products. And so when I did the analysis and published this late last year, the total addressable market in the United States for cannabinoids derived from hemp was $28 billion. Well, last year, the sales of legal adult use and medical was $28 billion. So there's a huge market which may or may not be able to be sustained with the current amount of acreage right now that's being licensed in the United States. Now, can Europe learn from that? Well, they've already have kind of taught the US a lesson where they've controlled the production, they've insisted on certified seed, they have good regulation. It's tight control, but there's still opportunity nonetheless for hemp in the United States, especially on the fiber and grain side for industrial applications. 20% of Mercedes cars are parts derived from hemp. And so there's already these industrial applications in automobile industry and plastics and the like that go beyond the cannabinoid side of the hemp market.
Maybe one more, Gaio, do we have time for one more question?
Sorry, we're out of time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We even went over by like a minute and a half because I'm a benevolent and kind MC. Let's hear it again for Beau Whitney. And if you have